Assalamu alaikum, hello, and welcome back to Liberated Voices. You're here with myself, Intia Fatima Merchant, and your co-host,
Hussein Abuda Ali the Akidu. Today, we'll be talking to Orlando de Rocha Hill, who is a Brazilian activist with Counterfire, and we'll be discussing the Brazilian elections. Thank you for coming, Orlando.
welcome.
Orlando, obviously a great result that Lula won, but not all great. I know you've been quite worried about some aspects of the result. Maybe you could just give us a bit of reasoning behind that.
Well, I think it's what Lula said in his first speech as president-elect, where he says that they weren't campaigning just against the candidate, Bolsonaro, but they were campaigning against the Brazilian state. And Bolsonaro used everything in the Brazilian state. And the worst was on the 19th of October, there was a meeting in the presidential palace in where they came up with a plan of how to disrupt the voting process. And they used the police to set up checkpoints. And the excuse was that it was going to investigate irregular usage of transport for voters. But they were targeting, and they didn't really need to say, look, target Lula supporters, because most of the people in the police force are Bolsonaro supporters. So the message was given, and especially in the Northeast, where Lula has got a lot of power, where his stronghold, where he won the elections, whole buses were stopped and people were taken out of the buses. They were told to line up and put their hands on their head. And we don't quite know how many voters didn't get to the polling station, but it was heavily targeted on Lula supporters. There's even a story of a young man that was going, and he said he was a Lula supporter, but he said, no, I'm going to vote for Bolsonaro. And the guy put a sticker of Bolsonaro on the car and he wasn't stopped. So that's one point. Of course, there's another point, which is Brazil isn't a fascist regime, but Bolsonaro operates under fascism. He is a fascist. He defends the fascist ideology. He's an authoritarian, and he creates that in the public. And there's no doubt that there is popular support for Bolsonaro. 49% of the vote is not something to laugh at, which makes it difficult for Lula now to govern.
Because as far as I know, the parliament in Brazil is not completely pro-Lula. How do you see the parliament?
Oh, it's very right-winged. It's one of those mad things. I mean, Lula can win, but I think a fifth of it is the Workers' Party, and then you've got other left-wing parties to support Lula. But it is extremely conservative. And I think it's one of the most conservative Congress that they've had so far, supported by the right wing and the extreme right wing. If Lula wants to govern, he's going to have to govern with the Congress. I think that's where the left will have to be building a mass movement. It won't come through the Congress. It's not going to come through the Congress or through civilized debate or anything.
So it sounds like Lula's just going to have a hard time ruling, even though he's won. It sounds like it's going to be difficult.
Yeah, but having said that, he is very good at it. He was very successful in ruling with Congress that he didn't have the majority in. He's a very able man in that sense.
So how comes do you think most of the police force and most of Congress is for Bolsonaro?
Well, there's history in that. I mean, Brazil, you can't forget that Brazil was the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery. I mean, it was abolished in 1888. The origin of the Brazilian state is built on that.
More slaves were taken to Brazil than any other country in the Americas.
Yes.
Wow.
I think Rio de Janeiro was the largest slave port, and then Liverpool. So we've got two large, both sides of the Atlantic. And Brazilians and the Portuguese were the greatest slave traders. I think British become the English, because there was no Britain at the time. England was second, remembering that Brazil and Portugal would be the same thing, because Brazil was a colony of Portugal.
Mm.
Well, how do you think Bolsonaro gets so much support? Do you think this right-wing thing all comes from the slavery days, or do you think there's more modern tactics used? I mean, how comes fascism is so high in
Well,
Brazil?
well, you got to remember how fascism begins, doesn't it? I mean, it's when capitalism stops offering any sort of solution, and the capitalist class appeals to fascism, thinking that they can control fascism. Typical, and then it gets out of hand. I think that's what happened with Bolsonaro, and that's why elements of the capitalist class now support Lula. They shifted sides, even including agribusiness, the financial sector, other sectors of the capitalist class have kind of abandoned Bolsonaro to support Lula because Bolsonaro is not controllable, like any fascist.
And on that,
Just to be clear, that does not, I'll get a lot of criticism for this. That does not mean that Brazil is a fascist regime or anything like that. But what I'm very clearly saying is that Bolsonaro is a fascist and he functions as a fascist.
Because there were some fears about, in the West anyway, within some circles, that if he lost, he was going to try and do some sort of coup. With Biden now tweeted something about congratulations on free and fair elections. It's very hard to do that, isn't it, without America?
Yeah, well, he tried. And he's still trying. He's like 24 hours without speaking. He's in silence. Usually what happens in a democracy is when you lose, you phone your opponent and say, well, congratulations. Hope you have a good one. I'll remain in a loyal opposition or something like that, right? He's not doing that. And at the same time, you've got roadblocks by truck drivers. The truck drivers, which is very typical in Latin America, what overthrew Allende in Chile in the 70s. And they're blockading roads and calling for a military intervention. But what happened during the election day on Sunday was that although the police did put up over 300 checkpoints and stopped cars, and that's why Brazil is not a fascist regime, because the electoral court asked the police to stop that. And not all the police were actually in favor of that. There was a group of them, and it wasn't able to carry it out. And I think I just read a tweet from a friend, and it said that what Bolsonaro is doing now is remaining quiet because ultimately he's a coward. So instead of taking the leadership like Trump did, one thing you can say for Trump, at least he takes the leadership, he takes the initiative. Bolsonaro, he's not doing that. He's keeping quiet and waiting for his supporters to take to the streets.
Of course, yeah.
But that's not happening.
So for those of our viewers that maybe don't have a great background on the contenders for that election, can you give a little bit of background on why Bolsonaro is so outwardly fascist? What has he done that makes him so outwardly fascist?
Well, from a very young age, he was a supporter of the military dictatorship. There's even a story that, which I don't quite know how true it is. During the 70s, what you had in Brazil was that there were left-wing groups that took up on arms and had a whole armed, kind of following Che Guevara's theory of setting up forks of resistance. And there is a story that Bolsonaro did tell where Lamarca was. And Lamarca he was a captain and he abandoned the army to join the resistance.
Was this against the dictatorship?
Yeah, against the dictatorship. So he's very much pro. He thinks that was the best time. He says things like he's in favor of, there's a old fascist tradition to be in favor of God, the family, and the fatherland. Those are the three. I think Hitler used to say the same thing. In the traditional family and against any sort of homosexuality, very traditional. Although he's not traditional because he's had about 3 women, 3 wives, children from all over the place. He asked his wife to abort, even though he's against abortion.
Wow.
it's he is a hypocrite. I mean,
He's a populist.
he defends these things a bit like Trump, but then you see in Trump and in America, all these right-wing Christians, defenders of traditional values, support a man who doesn't practice traditional values.
But and just in case some of our viewers might not be aware, can you just give a quick summary of the dictatorship and what it was?
The dictatorship overthrew, like most, a democratically elected progressive government who was doing things like land reforms and so on. And that happened in 1964. It ended in 1982. Different from the ending like in Argentina and Chile and so on. It was a gradual ending. It was a military dictatorship, but you didn't have, they rotated the presidents. So they had like kind of indirect presidents. So there was a rotation. So you didn't have someone like Pinochet in power.
So that's fairly recent then, 1982. That's quite.
Yeah. I remember. I was brought up under it. Yeah. And that's where my political education came from.
So one of the main issues that has come out in this election was the environment. There's been a lot of reporting around the environment. What could we expect from Lula, and what did we see from Bolsonaro regarding environmentalism?
Well, under Lula, the deforestation was gradually falling. But with Bolsonaro, it shot up. And it's basically because of his alliance with agribusiness and ranchers. There's even a say, his ministers were recorded saying that take advantage of the lockdown and let the cattle run through. So, and it increased, I think, by 2/3 the deforestation of the Amazon. Lula is promising a zero cut. I mean, no deforestation, just stop it and protect the bio environments that you have around Brazil, including the Amazon. And he's got like Marina Silva, which is a big Green Party campaigner. She's of Soledad Hage, that's her new party. And she's probably getting a ministry. He's also promised to have a minister of, well, you don't call them indigenous people anymore. Now it's the first people, os povos originários.
Because the first people and the environment, they're quite linked in Brazil.
And the rubber tappers too.
Okay, the rubber tappers.
Yeah, that's like Chico Mendes he was killed. He was a big rubber tapper, and he was killed because he was managing to unite the first people and the rubber tappers together.
So who are the rubber tappers?
The rubber tappers are the people who live off rubber from the rubber trees, which are native to Brazil. So it's not like in Indonesia where you have plantations of rubber trees. In Brazil, you've got them. They're just part of the forest.
That's cool. So this whole environmental aspect, that's actually quite a big one then. Has there been a lot of international attention?
Tremendous. Like I went to vote in West London College, and all Brazilians had to flood down from all parts of the Great Britain to go there. And the Greenpeace had got a big van with lights on the side saying, protect the Amazon. Brazilians, make sure you vote for the Amazon and so on. So, and I think there's one of the reasons that the so-called international community were kind of cheering for Lula was because of that. Because I think the Amazon's on a tipping point that if any more trees are cut down, it destroys the whole micro environment. And they're thinking that what might happen is that the rain will stop falling and you'll have, instead of a forest, a savanna.
Yeah, it is a really important issue.
It won't take much to for it to reach this tipping point.
Do you think Lula will uphold that promise?
I think he will. I think Lula is a very honest man, and his critics will say no, but he isn't. But he is. Lula comes from the movement. He was a trade unionist. In fact, he was a trade unionist that didn't believe in doing politics in the beginning. Only afterwards did he came up with the idea of organizing a workers' party. But he's not a politician in the sense that somebody who begins in politics then joins the movement. He is actually from the movement, the trade unionist movement, and the Workers' Party was an expression of that. It had the left wing of the Catholic Church. It had socialists, people who took up in the guerrilla warfare, like Juma, loads of people, that just a big united front.
So is Bolsonaro, was he a climate change denialist?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah. He thinks he's got his speech saying the importance is not the effing tree, but what is underneath the tree, the gold, the oil.
I suppose that fits, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So there's also been quite a few reports I've come across, I haven't looked into them properly, but of violence in the months leading up by supporters of Bolsonaro.
Yeah, Bolsonaro is very much in favor of arming people as a way of protecting against whatever, protecting your property and so on. So the weapon ownership in Brazil has increased tremendously. And there were the various episodes that happened during this campaign, but two of the most important ones was with the ex-congressman Roberto Jefferson, who was in house arrest, and they plotted this whole plan that they were going to go there, arrest him, and then he was going to make a fuss and so on, and it would be seen as a victim of tyranny. But things went wrong because he recorded a video and so on, and the police went there without any bulletproof vests, just t-shirts. And when he got to his house, the guy went berserk and started shooting and threw 2 grenades, injured a policeman. Fortunately didn't kill anyone. But and then there was another case of Zemilia, a congresswoman, and this was an elected congresswoman who got out of a car, tripped, accidentally fell, and she put the blame on a Black journalist. And she ran after the guy with a gun, pointed out a gun, held him, told him to lie down in the bar. And
I mean, that is ridiculous.
Yeah, and nothing happened to her. That's the absurdity of it. You'd think that most countries in the world, you'd be arrested and you wouldn't be able to be a congresswoman, but she is. What Bolsonaro has done is kind of normalize this kind of violence.
So following up on something you said earlier, say Brazil is not a fascist country or a fascist regime. It just has a fascist in charge.
Yeah.
Just wondering, when Lula was previously arrested, was there something going on there with the judicial system? Because it was widely believed that he was innocent or that it was a politically motivated.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. And that's why all the cases, 26 cases were pulled out against him. And none of them could be brought to court. In fact, the English lawyers that I spoke to here, they were saying that in this country, in Britain, it wouldn't have never gone to court because of lack of proof.
And something similar happened to the last president, Dilma.
Yeah, Dilma. Yeah, Dilma was because of fiddling with the budget, like what most countries and governments or even businesses do that to make it look like it's an accounting trick to make it look like you don't have a deficit because you throw your expenses to the next year. And she was charged on that, but it was clearly politically motivated, to the point that as soon as she was impeached, it was dropped. The same thing with Lula. As soon as he wasn't allowed to run anymore, all the cases were dropped.
So the next thing, obviously, we like to do a lot on geopolitical analysis.
Yeah.
Latin America right now has seen a wave of a resurgence, really, of left-wing governments. Do you think Brazil can join with the sort of Venezuela?
Oh yeah, obviously. Obviously.
Is Lula that far left, or?
It's not even that he's far left. I mean, he's not far left at all. I mean, I think what you could call Lula is like your classic social democrat who believes in a welfare state. That's Lula. But he's also, maybe because he's this traditional social democrat, he believes in non-intervention in other countries. So what he would say, in fact, it was interesting because a reporter once said, oh, how are you going to work with authoritarian governments like Venezuela and Saudi Arabia? And Lula responded, well, that's very good that you mentioned Saudi Arabia, because most people don't mention Saudi Arabia. They just mention Venezuela. And he says, look, we work with anyone. What I've got to look after is my country. I'm not looking after other people's country. It's up to the people of that country to deal with it. And also what he's very much against is the dangerous polarization of what the United States is trying to play now with China and isolating China. He's in favor of working with China, even working with Russia. He wants to rebuild BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. He wants to strengthen the Mercosur, the South American Union, trade union. And he's very proud of the role Brazil played in financing the development of African countries. So I think having a country like Brazil, the size of Brazil and the importance of Brazil, going against this dangerous polarization is important.
Okay, and just finally, obviously, one thing that's quite important to us is the Palestinian issue. There's a picture that's been going around recently, or two pictures, one of Bolsonaro's wife at the polling booth wearing an Israel flag on her shirt during the election, and one from of Lula with the keffiyeh around his neck. What was Bolsonaro's foreign policy towards Israel, and what could Lula potentially do for the Palestinian people?
Well,
what does he want to do?
Yeah, Bolsonaro wanted to move the capital wanted to move the embassy to Jerusalem and recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Lula's won't do that. It'll remain in Tel Aviv. This is an interesting thing about Brazil. Brazil has always, even under the military dictatorship, has been on the side of the Palestinians. Brazil has a huge immigration of Lebanese and Syrians, and they make a huge part of the ethnic background. Absolutely. My daughter's grandfather was Lebanese, so there's a relationship. And I think Brazil never ever voted against the Palestinians, even under the military dictatorship. The only time they did vote with the United States and Israel was under Bolsonaro. So I think it'll be important for the Palestinians to have Lula as president.
Yeah, definitely. It seems so. Well, unfortunately, we have come to the end of today's episode. Orlando, just before we finish, I have one final question for you. Seeing as the situation is quite volatile, it seems to be, new things coming out every couple of days. What can we expect to see in the next couple of days, in your opinion?
Well, I think because I think Bolsonaro is a coward, I don't think he's going to do anything. He's just going to go away. He might move to Miami or something like that because being afraid of being arrested. He's closed all his dealings, so no one can investigate it for 100 years. And I think Lula's going to break that and actually go after him. But so
that would be interesting.
So I can't. I think Lula will consolidate. There's going to be a period where you're going to have people shuffling for power, and let's see what's going to happen.
No, I wish we could talk more, to be honest. This is it's very hard to pack this issue into 30 minutes.
Definitely. But it has been a very enlightening 30 minutes. I will say that I have learned a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully we'll get you back again.
Okay.
Sometime in the future to on the latest, hopefully positive issue, inshallah.
Oh yeah.
Where can the viewers and listeners find you and some of your work?
Well, as I said, I'm from Counterfire, and I write any article about Brazil. I'm always writing, so you can go to counterfire.org.uk, and I'm there.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much to all of our listeners as well. Inshallah, we'll see you again soon with our next episode.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum.